Hi everyone, hope this finds you well. Frederick Buechner is a Christian writer that I really like. He's not just a writer, he's a theologian and a minister. And Frederick Buechner experienced some very painful moments in his life that really impacted him and shaped his life. And just a few of the painful things that happened to him, probably the main one was his father committed suicide when Frederick was 10 years old. And this caused serious emotional problems for Frederick, his younger brother, and especially his mother, which he had to deal with at a very young age. And then later in life, his daughter suffered from an eating disorder and came very close to dying. So Buechner was once at a retreat, and he was sharing about the pain he'd experienced in his life and how God had helped him use it to grow spiritually. And after his talk, a man came up to him and said, you've had a great deal of pain in your life. You've been a good steward of it. You've been a good steward of your pain. Now Buechner was struck by that comment because he had never thought before about being a good steward of your pain. When we hear the word steward, we generally think of money, and we think churches have Stewardship Sunday where they're trying to increase the giving in the church for needy causes. But we also need to think of being good stewards of not just money, but also our time, our abilities, the skills and talents that God has given us. But more than that, we need to be good stewards of everything that comes into our life, including the difficult things, the painful and puzzling things that happen to us during the course of our lives. And Buechner, that man said, you've been a good steward of your pain. Buechner began to think about Jesus' parable of the talents and how we might be able to put pain in that parable and look at it that way. So that's what I want to do today a little bit, to apply the category of pain to Jesus' parable of the talents, how we can be good stewards of the difficult things, the painful things that happen to us. But the first thing I want us to see is that, we all know this, pain is universal. Everyone in this life experiences pain. Everyone has times of suffering in their life. In the book and in the movie, I really love The Princess Bride. The Dread Pirate Roberts famously points out to Princess Buttercup, says, life is painful, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something. And that's true. No one goes through this life free of pain. No one experiences only good, happy, positive moments and times in their life. Suffering comes to all of us. It's universal. We are all familiar with pain of various types and intensity. Loss of what we have and love, that's just part of life. Loss and pain, that's part of living in this fallen, sinful world. When Jesus looked out at the world around him of young people and old people, fortunate people, the not so fortunate, poor people, rich people, all the people around him, Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I think Jesus was saying something of the same thing I've mentioned already, that we all experience difficulties and pain in our life. No matter who you are, how fortunate or unfortunate, how rich you are, poor, this or that, whatever your situation is. Part of what it means to be human in this world, in this fallen, sinful world, is to be weary and burdened by pain and desperately in need of rest. And Jesus says, come to me, I will give you rest. So the universality of pain, the fellowship of suffering, we all know, that happens to us in this life. We're all in this situation. Second thing I think we need to realize is that there are many different ways of dealing with pain. We all have different ways of dealing with our pain, depending on what caused the pain and how we happen to be feeling, how we are at that particular moment. You can make a long list of different ways people have of dealing with the pain they experience. I just want to mention a few that seem to me to be, principal ways that people deal with the bad things that happen, the sad things that happen, the things that cause them pain. One of them, and this is one that I think most dysfunctional families tend to choose, is to deal with your pain by simply trying to forget it, shutting it away, pretending it never happened, okay? But the thing is, if you deal with pain that way, just pretend it didn't happen, forget about it, you're shutting yourself off from others. You're isolating yourself when you do that. When you do that, you're trying to dismiss your pain. You don't want to be reminded of it, and you don't want to be reminded of it by seeing or acknowledging the pain that other people have in their lives. And so the price that you pay by dealing with your pain, by forgetting about it, by just trying to stuff it aside, by not looking at it, is that some part of you doesn't grow. The compassionate part of you won't grow. The part that by looking at your own pain would open you up to the sense that other people around you are in pain, that you're able to reach out to them and reach into their lives and help them with their pain. People like that, have friends, but they're not friends that they really care for and not willing to be open and honest with them so that they could help each other. That's one way of dealing with pain. Bad things happen, painful things happen, and you try and survive it by simply going on as if nothing happened. Okay, it didn't happen at all. Forget about it. Shrug it off. Say, oh, it was nothing, and just try and carry on. Another way of dealing with pain is that somehow you get trapped by your pain. You're being stopped. You're stopped in your tracks. You're never, in a sense, able to escape your pain. You can't move on from it. You can't get out of it and move on to whatever lies beyond it. Something bad and painful happens to someone, and they fix on that for the rest of their lives. Okay, they can't get over it. They'll tell everyone they meet, what happened to them that caused them so much pain. I remember Robert Dalton in our church telling me about a church member in the past whose wife cheated on him and had an affair with another man in the church. And so this couple wound up getting divorced. But the wrong husband never got over the pain of his wife's betrayal. He talked about it all the time. It was one of the first things that he would mention when he met someone new who came into the church. He would tell them about what happened to him. It seemed like that was the biggest thing that had ever happened to him. And so he was trapped in his pain. It becomes a type of confinement. You can't seem to get out of it. You keep living it over and over again, almost relishing the bitterness of it. So you deal with pain by allowing it to overwhelm you, by allowing it to stop you emotionally in your tracks right there. It's one way, I guess, of surviving your pain, because you take a kind of grim, awful pleasure in your pain and what happened to you. Another way of dealing with pain is to kind of make a kind of a joke out of it. Someone will say, guess what happened to me, and tell you about some terrible, painful experience they had, and then they'll surprise you by laughing after they tell you, to laugh about their pain, but they're not laughing in a good way. In a rather grim, macabre, forced way. And it's like it's a grim joke. It's not really funny, because what happened to them was actually terrible, a very bad thing. But they try and deal with it by making a joke about it. They hide their pain behind the joke, cover it up with kind of a grim, gallows humor. They don't want to talk about it in a serious way. They want to talk about the pain that they experience and they're still feeling. Well, another way of dealing with pain, the last one I want to mention of, I think, ways that are really not very effective, is that you make your pain a competition. Okay, you deal with it by, having competitive pain. Someone tells you something bad or painful that happened to them. You say, "Oh, you think you had it bad? You think that was painful? Well, let me tell you what happened to me." your pain is nothing compared to my pain, what I suffered. And so you deal with it by seeing pain as sort of an accomplishment. I've suffered like you wouldn't believe. That's what happened in my life. And if you think you suffered, well, I can tell you how I've suffered so much more. And whatever painful experience you've had, they can one-up you. And they can win in the competition of pain. Well, those are all ways of dealing with pain that I think really don't work. They're not very effective. The best way of dealing with pain is the one I mentioned earlier, and that is to be a good steward of your pain. And I want us to read Jesus' parable of the talents. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with it. But it goes like this in Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14. Jesus told this parable. He said, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. And immediately the master went on his journey. Then he who had received the 2 talents went and traded with them, and he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made 5 more talents. And likewise the servant who received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the servant who received 1 talent, he went and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time the master of these servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Master, you entrusted me with 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful with a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The servant who had received the 2 talents came and said, Master, you entrusted me with 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. His master said to him the same thing he said to the first servant. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the servant who had received the 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid. Now I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, here you have what is yours. But his master answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that's the parable. Jesus told many extraordinary parables. And when you first, start to listen to Jesus' parable there, read it, it doesn't end the way that you expected it to end, And that's the way Jesus' parables went many times. If you or I had written the parable in our own boring way, we would have rewarded the 1 talent servant, wouldn't we? We would have given him a break and said, well, he thought he was being sensible by not taking risks with his master's property, his money, so we would have given him a break. But that's not the way the story goes. The story is actually rather frightening and fascinating at the same time. The parable talks about the talents as amounts of money. One gets 5, one gets 2. The third servant gets 1. But I think we can also interpret it as the talents being whatever God and life has given us. Whether it's money, abilities, time, social standing, influence, good experiences, bad experiences, everything that God and life gives us. We all have varying amounts of talents, however you want to see talents. We are to use them for the profit of God and His kingdom. The parable makes the point that the way we use what we have been given, that's what is important. How we use what we've been given by God in life. So with that in mind, I want us to focus on the one talent man for a moment. What he did and the consequence of what he did. It's really the most striking part of the parable, I think, and also the most frightening part of the parable. He took his one talent and buried it in the ground, and then suffered a terrible consequence. And he explained to his master why he had buried it. He said, "I was afraid. I was afraid." And we think, well, we can understand that. The master in the parable, Jesus told, is God. God is the master. When the servant said, "I knew you to be a hard man, and I was afraid," what if I lost the talent? We think, maybe he's right. God does seem to be a hard master in many ways. And we come across verses, in the New Testament and say, whoa, that's hard. God is is not being easy on us. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." That's a hard rule. That's a hard thing to try and do, we think. Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. The Apostle John tells us in his letter, 1 John, chapter 3, verse 14, John says, "Anyone who does not love remains in death." I think, whoa, that's a hard saying. In other words, not to love, and John's talking about loving like God loves us. Not to love is in a sense to die. And then not to mention that Jesus says we have to love our enemies and do good to those who persecute us. We think, whoa, these are hard requirements that God is putting on us. And so we think, he was right. The man with the one talent, he was right to be afraid. There's so much in life. There's so much in the nature of God as we understand Him that makes us afraid. God asks a great deal of us. So in fear, being afraid of His life, afraid of living, afraid of making the wrong use of the one talent he was given, afraid to do the wrong thing, afraid of whatever he was afraid of, the man takes the talent and he buries it. He buries what he'd been given. He buries his experience. And the master is angry. And the one talent man says another thing that is also revealing. He says, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed." And as I understand that, God does not sow pain in the field of our life. God does not make painful, terrible things, bad things happen to us. Car accidents, cancer, dementia, suicide, all the bad things, painful things you can think of. God doesn't cause those bad things, those evil things to happen to us. God does not sow these things, but God expects that out of whatever the sinful fallen world does to us, we will somehow reap a harvest, that we will grow and we will actually gain more from those things. God does not sow these things that happen, but He expects us to deal with those things in creative and redemptive and life-opening sorts of ways. But again, the one talent man was right. God does reap where He does not sow. He gathers where He did not scatter seed. He does not sow the pain. He does not make the pain happen to us, but He looks to us to harvest treasure from the pain. And then in the parable, the master speaks His word of judgment to the one talent man. He looks at the one talent man and He calls him a wicked and lazy servant. The servant is guilty of a number of sins, but being lazy is the one that is highlighted by the master, and he is condemned for it. Being lazy is trying to go through life on automatic pilot, not really making much of an effort, actually not really being alive, not making use of what you're given by God and in life and what happens to you, not making use of that, bearing what you might have made something out of, playing it safe with your life, the things that you have received, to bury your life, to bury your pain, bury your joy even, to bury whatever it is that God and life gives you, and then live as cautiously as you can without really living at all. And I think in some measure we all know what that means, because there's part of all of us in our lives that we choose not to live out because we're timid or afraid in some way. And the ultimate word of judgment that the master speaks to this 1 talent servant is, from him who does not have even what he has will be taken away. And that may seem unfair to us, okay, to take away the 1 talent from a man who only has 1 talent, and to give it to the servant who now has 10 talents, well, now he has 11 talents, okay. But really, that's the inevitable consequence of bearing your life. If you bury your life, if you don't face, among other things, your pain, your life shrinks. It's in a way your life is diminished. It's taken away. From him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Okay, that's punishment, but it's also a way of saying, that's what happens when you do not live your life, when you do not harvest all that's been given to you, including the bad things that happen to you, including your pain. You have less life every day. And then, of course, there are the other 2 faithful servants who put their money out to earn interest, use their talents to gain more. And the master calls them good and faithful servants. They somehow, despite the fact that their master is a hard master, despite the fact that God seems to make, difficult demands of us, to be perfect, to be loving, to be open, they had faith in him that somehow all would be well. That it's worth taking the risk. Even if you live your life and things don't turn out exactly the way you want, it's still, you trust in your master, you take the risk, you venture forth, you strive to do all that you can to gain more. And with the master, although he seems to be difficult, there's forgiveness, there's compassion, there's mercy in God. And therefore you dare to take your chances and do what you can with all that God and life has given you. And God promises, as Jesus said in this parable, to everyone who has, more will be given, and you will have abundance. So, to close off, as we apply this parable, going back to applying it to the pain that we all experience in life, I want to take note that Jesus said the first 2 servants went and traded with their talents. I think that word trade is a significant word. They took what they had been given to them and they traded with it. They were not life barriers. They didn't bury their life like the lazy servant. They were life traders. They traded life for life. They traded what they had been given with others so that they could even gain more. Now, what does it mean to trade? It means to give of what you have in return for what you need. You give of yourself. In return, you receive something from other people to whom you give. It's natural to trade with joy, for example. You say things like, I just couldn't contain my joy. It's a wonderful expression. I couldn't contain it. Couldn't contain my joy. I had to tell other people about it. I had to share it. Look at this wonderful thing. Look at this amazing thing that causes so much joy. You have to share joy. It's almost part of what joy is, the desire to share it. But it's not so natural to share the pain that we have, the pain we experience, to trade with the pain. That doesn't come quite as easy to us. Yet I think that's a lesson we can learn from the parable, to trade with what life has given us. And one of those things is pain, to trade with pain. Not to deny it, or to be trapped by it, or to joke about it, or make it into a competition, but to be a good steward of it, and to be open about it with each other. You know, if you think of the 12-step programs, that's what they're all about. You know, in the 12-step programs, you go to a place where people come together saying, we can't cope with our own sadness, our own bad memories and experiences. We can't really cope with our pain without each other and without God. And so people sit together in a room. And the key to these programs is that nobody tells anybody else what to do. No one lectures anyone. There's no preaching. Everyone simply talks out of his or her own experience, what has happened to them, the pain they've had, and not just surviving the bad times, but as they talk, you know, they grow through them, okay? And then you realize, as you sit there sharing with one another, you realize to what degree that story is your story as you share and trade with each other about the pain that you've experienced. You know, miracles happen because of the willingness to open the door into your pain. You open your ears and your eyes to the elusive, invisible presence of healing, of the power of God to heal, which moves as quietly, as undramatically as the wind moves. You know, there are moments of when we experience deep pain and grief. Notice that Jesus was there with us physically, where we could take hold of his hand and hold on to him as we experience these moments of pain. But even though Jesus isn't here with us physically, he does have hands to reach out and to hold on to. He has your hands, he has my hands to use. And there's the sense from time to time of Jesus' presence and comfort with us as we share and trade our pain with one another, as the good and faithful servants traded with their talents. You know, God can take a broken heart and not only mend it, but then cause it and use it to mend others. If we truly love each other with the love of Christ, then we'll come alongside each other to be there for one another and to share our pain together. You know, actually our pain is a precious gift that we have, that we didn't want it, but we have it to live out of it, and we can share it and trade it with each other for each other's benefit. The reward of doing that, as Jesus said, is to enter into the joy of your master. It seems, you know, like it's a difficult thing, but many times through the gates of pain, we enter into joy, the joy of our master. Amen.